On this episode of China Unscripted, got a dictator? Looking to overthrow them? Or him, let's be honest. We talk with a man who's been training activists to do just that. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
And joining us today is Srdja Popovic, an expert in nonviolent resistance and leader of Canvas, the Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies, as well as the author of Blueprint for Revolution. Thanks for joining us today, Srdja.
Pleasure being with you and looking forward to talking to China Uncensored.
Yeah. Well, so for the audience who might not be familiar with your background, why don't you give us like a little bit of a rundown of how you got started as a young activist in Serbia?
Hi everybody. This is a story of me. To start with, around the age of 18, I was playing a bass guitar in a rock band and studying biology and wasn't even interested in activism or politics. But when the bad guy named Slobodan Milosevic, also known as Butcher of Balkans, came to power in my country in late 80s, the things went upside down. We got the whole package of things all together within just a few years, beginning of few civil wars, large hyperinflation, growing authoritarianism, lack of future. And being a young person in such an environment leaves you with two choices: to fight or to flee. A lot of the people in my generation, unfortunately, fled the country. We had one of the largest brain drains in 90s, but some of us formed the student movement as early as 1992. We started with students' protests. 1996, 1997, after the Milosevic lost and stolen local elections, they spread nationwide. 1998, we formed a movement called Otpor, which is a Serbian word for resistance, and we grew from 11 people to 20,000 people in 2000, namely having a great role in mobilizing young people, doing pranks, doing campaigns, challenging authority of the ruler, also helping a bit with Serbian opposition getting united around these presidential elections. Long story short, movement was successful. Milosevic was defeated in election 2000, and then through nonviolent mass action persuaded to actually concede. He was sent to Hague, where he died during the trial for his war crimes. In Balkans, some of us left for politics. I've spent 2 years in the government and the parliament. In the first transitional Serbian government, I assume I wanted to see how the beast operates from the inside. Around 2003, we started getting invitations from movements across the globe, looking into documentary named Bringing Down Dictator. People were eager to learn how they can build the movements, how they can challenge autocracies in their countries. And since 2003, we have this organization named Canvas, Center for Applied Nonviolent Action and Strategies, which deals with training and educating people across the globe how to effectively oppose dictatorships, how to fight for human rights. Since recently, it turned more and more into environmental issues, anti-corruption issues, and we also do a few university courses.
Yeah, so I find it so interesting how your experiences, you hone them down into lessons that you can actually teach other activists around the world how to overthrow their authoritarian regimes. A lot of that is the focus of your book, Blueprint for Revolution, which I highly recommend to anyone watching. But so walk us through it. Say, we're activists in a hypothetical authoritarian state. How do we go about from a conspiracy of three to overthrowing a dictator?
First of all, this applies to a lot of social movements. There has been a lot of research done on it, but the way we did it was through our own experience and then building from experience into the lesson plan rather than vice versa. So this is more of the practitioner's wisdom than some kind of theoretical wisdom. Later, we found that it is also supported by theory. So first of all, let's do a little 3-minute crash course on how to build a movement for dummies. First of all, the core group matters. It is important to start with a group of committed people, and that group of committed people has first to figure out where they go. So having a thing we call the vision of tomorrow, which is the alternative vision of society or the community, regardless of the scale, is very important. So it's not only us being anti-dictator, anti-this or anti-that. It is us trying to figure out if these wrong things are not there, how the society would look different. This vision, which serves as a light at the end of the tunnel, is really important to keep movements focused on their path. Step number 2, map your journey. You need to take a look at the society you want to change. You need to identify constituencies. People power struggles rely on people. So who are the people you want on this journey? Who are the people you want to mobilize on the journey, and what it takes for them to get interested in it? Very often movements start with big, vague goals, things like democracy and human rights, and figure out that the real power in mobilization is more in the bread and butter issues. The price of fuel, the price of transportation, the type of the air we breathe, corruption. So finding the way to connect the wider goal, the wider vision with the needs of the people you want to recruit is the key in the second step. So you map the battlefield, but you also listen to the people. Step number 3, understand that the real permanent changes are only institutional. So you need to look at the institutions which are upholding status quo and figure out how to target and sway these institutions. In some cases, it is state institutions. In some cases, this is educational institutions. You need to map your pillars. We call these institutions pillars of support because they uphold the status quo, and figure out how to deal with them. 3, you need to plan. You need to plan strategically. You need to plan tactically. There is a big misconception that a lot of this is spontaneous. The more you plan, the more careful you plan, the better the chances to succeed. Then, of course, you need to pick your tactics, and this is where the creativity and the humor and the wit and the power of the activism really comes in place. First of all, too often movements get involved in tactics before they start thinking strategy, and you can see it everywhere from I don't know, protests in Burma to BLM. People get outraged with an event or with a situation, and they get involved in the large protests. However, these protests tend to fail if they are not meticulously planned, if there is not what we call the order of battle, which institution you engage with when. And this type of planning is foremost where we talk about the strategy or we talk about the tactics. One more thing which really relates to all of the movements, large and small, across the planet, very often you need to counter risks and fear and apathy and figure out how to address these blocking issues in your campaign. Last but not of least importance, it's not only mobilization that matters, it's also organization. And I think the grand lesson from movements in the last 20 years is that you need to use these large waves of mobilization, whether installed by the organization, whether triggered by an event, into a long-lasting group of people that are connected among themselves, that share the goals, that share the plan. In other means, organization matter. That means you need to recruit people, train people, organize people, and, once again, all over again. So taking a look into this kind of waves of mobilization, you would imagine the organization as the steps up to the second floor, the third floor, the fourth floor, because the organization is what keeps movement alive between two waves of mobilization. And very often we see movements mobilize, peak large numbers, and then wane. The question is, do you use this to really develop a network of people committed to the goal who work relentlessly until the next window of opportunity for mobilization appears? Last but not of least importance, you need to finish what you start. When you take a look at the movements of nowadays, when you take a look at the scientific researches, you will figure out amazing things. Seems that it is easier to build from the small group of people to the large wave of mobilizations and actually reach millions on the street than to really turn these millions into the victory. Tangible victories, taking a look into 5 years after the major change, are more likely to fail than the mobilization phase. So once again, it's easier to oust the dictator than to follow it up with a democracy. And this is where you really need to think, what will keep these people involved during the transition? How do you make this large human capital, this large amount of the non-political people being involved in a movement, once turned into the people who are politically active, afterwards Also, what recent examples teaches us, democracy needs to be upheld and maintained. The world's largest backlashes in democracies are actually coming from democracies. Places like India or Brazil or Philippines or United States. If people abandon democracy, it won't live by itself. So keeping your government accountable, keeping citizens engaged is a must for a healthy democracy, long-term speaking.
Yeah, I remember something you said at the Oslo Freedom Forum this year in Miami, that democracy is like love. You have to make it every day.
It is very much like love, or if you want to be more cynical, like marriage. So it's not game over when you get married. It's not game over when you get kids. This is where the things really began. And sometimes these things are super pleasant, like sharing with your kids the joy of when they start swimming or when they start driving bike. Sometimes it's really painful when you want to make them brush their teeth, change their diapers, or persuade them to go to sleep. But in any cases, democracy is very much also like parenthood. So yes, you made this amazing thing happen. You made a kid get to this world. You made democracy get born into this world. But it needs maintenance. And without the people maintaining democracy will only last that long.
Well, I imagine, yeah, like the idea of like overthrowing a dictator, changing society, especially for young people, that's got to be a little, sexy in some ways. But when it comes to like, okay, we're in a democracy, now we have to sit in meetings and I have to listen to some jerk I don't like argue with me.
And then we have to compromise on things.
Yeah.
Oh man, you're so right. And I also, that you mentioned very important thing, the cool of the things. And very often people they see the thrill of the things, they see the courage of the things, but a lot of people really join these movements because these things are cool. When you live in a screwed up country, fighting for your future is cool. Outrunning police in the street, it's cool. Being a rogue, specifically for a young person, is cool. Being an outlaw is cool. I mean, everybody wants to be a James Dean. Even the generations who don't know who James Dean is want to be a James Dean. And being a James Dean, and then one day the James Dean win, and his normal is becoming new normal. And now you go back to your studies, you go back to your job, you go back to your arts, you go back to your music, you go back to your family. And now somebody expects you to sit in a meeting where we are, discussing a new law on how we will make, offshore companies more accountable. And I can't imagine the more boring topic to talk about for somebody who is 21 or 22. And finding a way to get these people involved in change, whether as a watchdogs to the new government, whether as a real part of this transition process. You have many, many examples where people really went to the government and to the parliament in their 20s and 30s. And some of these people really contribute to the change. But it's one thing, once again, the smell of tear gas is really addictive and it's nice. But in the same time, looking into transition is kind of boring. One big thing that comes with the transition, you don't have this large unification factor because the bad guy is not there anymore. And having a bad guy somehow unifies people with different goals, with different interests, because if we don't win, because if we don't survive, because if we don't hold each other's back, we are all doomed, regardless of our differences. Now, when this big threat factor is not there, we start noticing our differences, we start expressing our differences, we start arguing about our differences, and immediately one of the most important principles of successful movement, the unity, is lost. And taking a look into this tricky thing called transition, taking a look at how we can improve transitions across the globe, also taking a look how world loses interest the moment the dictator stepped down. So this is really fun. You have all of these international advisors and consultants and aid organizations around the place when you have a crisis. The moment they think the crisis is over, they start looking the other way. And then immediately the new transitional body in places like Egypt and Sudan needs to figure it out themselves. Well, guess what? There are countries which won democracy, won freedom through the nonviolent struggle, but they didn't have the blessing of have any kind of democratic institutions in the past. So not like they can rebuild their democratic institutions because there are none. They need to build them from the scratch. Well, is there a blueprint on how to help these people really get to the democracy without avoiding the very wrong idea that somehow you can just re-script something and you just come in with tanks and okay, let's build democracy in Afghanistan or in Iraq American way? This is not going to work. And we all learned the painful lessons how this is not going to work. So taking a look into how you make these societies, having their institutions, helping them build institutions of their own without imposing your own ideas on them is kind of also a tricky job. But it's also an international responsibility. As we all witnessed, autocracy is more or less like climate change. The fact that you are recycling in your home, that you are saving energy in your home or in your yard or in your little township or in your little country wouldn't change the fact that somebody else is burning Amazon forest somewhere else and that the whole climate is going down. Very similar autocracies tend to spread. And unfortunately, we see them spreading in the last decade.